"Daddy, is she a statue?" The question was whispered, but it sliced through the quiet like a siren. Jack Rowan looked down at his daughter. Nora's wide hazel eyes were locked on something or someone across the airport lounge. She stood on tiptoe, tugging the sleeve of his worn flannel jacket, pointing with one small finger that trembled slightly. In the far corner of the VIP lounge, framed by polished marble columns and a wall of rain-streaked glass, a woman sat motionless in a wheelchair. Not slumped, not curled, just still so still it felt deliberate. Her hands rested in her lap, pale against the deep navy fabric of her tailored coat, and a porcelain coffee cup sat untouched on the table beside her. Her legs crossed at the ankles, her posture perfect, her stillness unbearable. Jack followed Nora's gaze. "No, honey," he said softly. "She's not a statue. Then why's everyone acting like she is?" Nora tilted her head. "Nobody's talking to her." Jack didn't answer, because Nora was right. Businessmen in tailored suits typed rapidly on tablets, cabin crew bustled by with flight schedules and polished smiles, and assistants murmured into Bluetooth earpieces. Everyone moved around her like she was a fixture. Not a woman, not someone real. She was there, undeniably present, yet invisible in a way that made Jack's chest tighten. "Can we sit near her?" Nora asked, already swinging her little backpack over her shoulder. Maybe she just forgot how to be seen. Jack hesitated. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was a janitor, not in uniform today, but it didn't matter. Canceled flights didn't care about job titles. His daughter needed to get to her grandmother's, and the earliest standby was 3 hours out. They weren't meant for VIP lounges. But the airline mix-up had pushed them here for a moment, like fate shuffling them into the wrong room on purpose. He looked back at the woman. She hadn't moved. "Go ahead, find a seat," he said. "I'll grab us something." Jack crossed to the vending area, pulling loose change from his pocket. The coffee machine blinked like it had a grudge. He fought, with the buttons finally coaxing out 2 paper cups of something bitter and barely warm. When he turned, he saw Nora wasn't sitting. She was standing inches from the woman in the wheelchair. "Nora," he said, low sharp, but his daughter didn't flinch. She was staring at the woman the way only children do, with no fear, no agenda, just wonder. The woman finally turned her head. Slowly, precisely. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, wary, like someone who'd been approached too many times by the wrong kind of attention. But she didn't speak. Her lips barely parted. Nora reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a crayon drawing. She held it out with both hands. "I made this for you," she said. Jack's breath caught. The woman stared at the picture, confused. It was a simple sketch, a woman sitting in a chair by a tall window. But in the drawing, soft golden lines glowed around her like light. Like she wasn't just there, she was shining. The woman blinked, then took the paper with the care of someone handling glass. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was low, worn, like a piano key pressed too many times. "Because you looked like someone who forgot they still have a story," Nora said simply. "That did it." Jack stepped forward, the cups trembling slightly in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. She likes to draw." "I didn't mean to." The woman held up a hand. Not rude, not annoyed, just quiet. "She's fine," she said. Then after a beat, "She sees too much." Jack sat down slowly in the chair beside Nora, setting the cups down on the table. "I'm Jack," he said. "This is my daughter Nora. We're waiting for a plane that probably won't come," she finished for him. Eyes still on the drawing. "Just like me." Jack nodded. "Seems like it." A beat of silence. "I'm Clara," the woman said finally. "Clara Whitmore." Jack's breath caught. The name sounded familiar. Too familiar, but he didn't push it. "Nice to meet you, Clara." Nora plopped into the seat beside Jack and kicked her legs gently. "You don't talk like most grown-ups." Clara glanced at her. "Is that good or bad?" "Good. Most grown-ups talk like they're trying to sound like grown-ups." Jack chuckled. Clara's lips twitched the faintest edge of a smile. It vanished just as quickly. Clara set the drawing on her lap, her fingers tracing the childlike lines. "People used to talk to me all the time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but only when they needed something. A quote, a take, a story to make theirs louder." Jack said nothing. He knew the weight of being needed, but not seen. "Then the chair came," Clara said, "and the silence did too." "You're not silent," Nora said gently, just paused. The air stilled. For the first time since Jack walked in, Clara's eyes lifted, not guarded now, just tired. But inside them was something else, something flickering. Hope. She looked at Nora. "Tell me, brave girl, what does someone have to do to be unpaused?" Nora thought for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe you just need to tell someone something that scares you." Clara stared at her like she'd been slapped gently but truthfully. "I don't remember how," she murmured. Nora leaned forward. "That's okay. You can borrow my words until yours come back." Jack closed his eyes for a second. Just one, then looked at Clara. "You don't have to talk," he said quietly. "You can just sit, but we won't look past you. Promise." Clara nodded slowly, and as the rain pressed harder against the windows behind her, she turned her chair just slightly toward them. Not much, but enough. It was a beginning. "You know," Clara said softly, her fingers tracing the edge of the crayon drawing on her lap, "I once wrote an article titled, 'The Humanity in Passing Strangers.' I don't think I believed a word of it until today." Jack didn't respond right away. He just watched her from across the small airport table, steam rising between them from the paper cup he'd placed in front of her. It wasn't good coffee, barely warm, slightly sour, but it was real. It was offered. And, for someone like Clara, that had started to mean something. "Maybe some strangers just pass slower than others," he said. Clara looked up. Their eyes met fully for the first time, no flicker of evasion, no half-lowered lids. Just a long, still gaze. Hers was tired but intelligent. His steady but worn. "I used to be good with words," she said almost apologetically. "Now everything feels filtered. Like I'm underwater and all the sentences float away before I can catch them." "You still have good ones," Jack said. "You just don't throw them around like confetti." Clara blinked. Then the corner of her mouth twitched again, that almost smile she seemed to reserve for moments when something cracked open inside her just slightly. Nora returned with 2 small packets of sugar she'd scavenged from a nearby counter. She placed them beside Clara's cup like an offering. "I don't like bitter," she said, "so maybe you don't either." Clara took the sugar and tore the packet slowly. "You're very kind. I just think people are better when they're a little sweet," Nora said with a shrug, sliding into the seat next to her father. Jack turned to his daughter, amused. "Where'd you learn that line?" Nora grinned. "From Mom. She used to say it when you got all grumpy about traffic." Clara stirred the coffee with a wooden stick, letting silence settle around them again. But this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was restful. "Your mother sounds like someone I would have interviewed," Clara said. "Smart. Disarming. Honest." She was, Jack said, his voice lower now. Also stubborn. Brave in a way that makes the rest of us look like amateurs. Clara looked up sharply at that. Nora leaned into Jack's side, resting her chin on his arm. "She used to tell me that bravery didn't mean not being scared. It just meant doing the right thing, even if you were." Clara turned toward Nora. "And what's the right thing you think Nora didn't hesitate? Sitting with someone who looks like they forgot how to sit with themselves." That hit harder than expected. Clara's hand stopped stirring. The coffee rippled once, then stilled. She set the stick down and folded her hands carefully in her lap. "People used to sit across from me to get answers," she said, her voice almost absent. "Politicians, activists, war refugees. I held the microphone. I asked the questions. And now the only thing people ask me is, 'Do you need assistance to the gate?'" Jack leaned forward, slightly elbows on knees, and said, "Do you know?" she said. Then paused. "Yes, maybe. Not the kind they're offering." Jack nodded slowly. "There's a difference between being carried and being accompanied. You want the second." Clara blinked. That line, it landed. It stayed. "You don't talk much, Mr. Rowan," she said, "but when you do—" Jack shrugged. "Sometimes silence says more." Nora suddenly perked up. "Want to see what I'm drawing now?" Clara's face softened. "I would." Nora opened her sketchpad and turned it toward her. It was a new picture, 3 figures this time. A girl, a man, and a woman in a wheelchair. But the wheelchair had wings. And all 3 were sitting beneath a tree with a banner floating overhead that read, "Here is safe." Clara stared at it longer than she intended to. When she spoke, her voice wavered. "Is this what you see when you look at me?" Nora nodded. "Not always, but now, yeah. You're starting to feel safe." That undid her, not dramatically, not with tears, but with something quieter. A tremor in the hands, a shift in breath, a blink too slow. "You have no idea what those words mean to someone who's felt like a burden for over a year," Clara said. "My father owns half of Whitmore Communications, but somehow it's my wheelchair that makes people treat me like a silent headline." "Then maybe it's time to write your own," Jack said, voice level, "one they can't edit." Clara looked up again. Something had shifted in her expression. She wasn't just enduring the conversation anymore, she was present. "I don't think I've chosen anything in months," she said quietly. "Not my clothes, not my schedule, not even when I go outside." Jack tilted his head. "Well, you just chose coffee. With us. That's a start." She let out a laugh, a real one this time. Soft, breathy, surprised. "That's a dangerously optimistic worldview, Mr. Janitor." He smiled. "It's not optimism, it's survival. Sometimes all we get are small choices. You pile them up until they build a different life." Nora leaned over and whispered to Clara. "That one's going in my journal." Clara laughed again, lighter this time. From across the lounge a low chime sounded, another flight delayed. The announcement echoed overhead, sterile and impersonal, but in their corner something very personal was happening. Something slow and warm and alive. Jack stood slowly. "I'll go check the board. See if we're still stuck," Jack Clara said before he turned. He looked back. Her gaze held his, still tired, but no longer dull. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the coffee, for not asking what happened to me." Jack nodded. "You don't owe anyone your pain." He walked off. Nora leaned closer, whispering just loud enough. "Told you. He's quiet, but he sees everything." Clara looked down at her drawing again, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, and that changed everything. The next hour passed like soft breath on glass, fogged, quiet, almost sacred. Clara sat, slightly angled now, no longer facing the terminal windows, but the 2 people who against every expectation had begun to rewrite the shape of her silence. Nora was back to sketching, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth in deep concentration. Jack had returned from checking the departures board with a shrug and a dry, "We're still nobody's in line." And somehow that had felt like a gift. Clara watched Nora, now small fingers gripping a crayon too tightly for comfort. "What are you drawing this time?" she asked, her voice steadier than before. Nora didn't look up. "A woman who forgot she's magic." Clara blinked. "That's specific. You told me you used to write stories, so I figured maybe someone needs to remind you're one." Jack, who had just taken a sip of his coffee, coughed a laugh into his sleeve. "She does that," he muttered. "Says things like they're fortune cookies, but better." Clara smiled. It wasn't careful. It wasn't small. It was the kind that pulled just slightly at the scar near her left cheek, the one that most people politely avoided looking at. "I've been called many things," she said, "but magical is new." Nora shrugged. "Well, if you ever forget again, you can keep the drawing. Tape it to your bathroom mirror or something." Jack looked over at Clara. "She's serious. We've got half a hallway of crayon wisdom at home." Clara leaned forward slightly, voice lower now. "You talk about your home like it's a real place, a safe place." Jack tilted his head. "That's because we made it one. After everything." Clara's eyes stayed on him. "Can I ask what happened?" Jack paused. Not from avoidance, just weighing whether the truth belonged here, but something in Clara's tone made the answer feel less like a burden and more like a shared offering. "My wife," he said finally. "Lena. She was a nurse, sharp as hell, funny. Kind in a way that made people want to be better just to earn it." Clara nodded slowly. "Sounds like someone worth remembering." Jack's gaze didn't move. "She died in a fire. I was there." Nora's hand paused in mid-sketch. She didn't interrupt, just glanced up, then kept drawing. "I was a firefighter back then," Jack continued. "The call came in from her hospital. I shouldn't have gone, but I did. She was helping evacuate the NICU when the ceiling collapsed." Clara didn't speak. She didn't ask if he tried to save her. She didn't need to. It was written in the lines of his jaw, the hush in his voice. Jack exhaled through his nose. "I quit the department after that. Took a janitor job because it was quiet. Simple. Nobody expects a hero with a mop." "That's not why Nora sees you the way she does," Clara said gently. Jack gave a half smile. "No, that's because she's the hero now. I just keep the lights on." There was a long pause. Then Nora said, "He still saves people, just slower now." Clara blinked hard. Something about the way Nora said it so sure, so unpolished, it hit like truth. The kind that slips in through cracks and stays. Clara looked down at her lap. "You know, I always thought bravery meant standing up in front of a room full of powerful men and not flinching, asking the hard questions, printing the truth even when it hurt." Jack watched her. "That's still brave. But that's not the hard part," Clara whispered. "The hard part is admitting that somewhere along the way, I started hiding behind the strength people assumed I had." Nora looked up. "Maybe being brave is letting someone see you before you're ready." Clara stared at the little girl like she'd been handed a key she didn't know she needed. "I haven't written anything in over a year," she confessed. Jack leaned forward. "Why not?" "Because the last thing I ever typed was a resignation letter. My father called it graceful. I called it giving up. And yet, here you are," Jack said. "Talking, sharing, sitting with strangers. Maybe you didn't quit. Maybe you just..." Paused. Clara swallowed. Her fingers flexed once over her lap. Then, slowly, she reached into the side pocket of her tote and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It was scuffed edges worn the elastic loop frayed from time and pressure. "I carry this everywhere," she said, "but I haven't opened it since the accident." Jack didn't speak. He didn't need to. Clara placed the notebook on the table. Nora scooted closer. "Wanna borrow a crayon?" That made Clara laugh genuinely now. The sound was soft and low, but real. "No," she said, fingers brushing the cover, "but maybe I'll borrow your courage." Nora beamed. Then, in a motion that felt like something breaking and blooming all at once, Clara opened the notebook. The first page stared back at her blank, unforgiving. She reached into her coat for a pen. And then, with hands that trembled but didn't stop, she wrote 4 words. "I'm still right here." Jack watched her. Something in his chest shifted, something old and heavy that hadn't moved in years. That he said quietly is the bravest sentence I've heard all day. Clara looked up, and in her eyes for the first time wasn't pain or distance or apology. It was presence, and something dangerously close to hope. Clara's pen hovered just above the paper, like her hand hadn't fully caught up with the decision her heart had already made. "I'm still right here." She read it again, whispered it aloud, barely audible over the murmur of the terminal, then closed the notebook slowly, as if sealing something sacred. Jack sat across from her elbows on his knees, watching without judgment. He hadn't said anything in the last few minutes, but his silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to rebuild. "You ever feel like the hardest part of being broken isn't the pain," Clara said finally, "but the way people start treating you like you'll never be whole again?" Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, and the more they treat you that way, the more you start to believe them." Nora, sitting between them now, looked up from her sketch pad. "That's why we have to draw new pictures." Clara turned to her. "New pictures?" Nora held up her latest drawing. It was a tree again, tall and soft in color, but this time its trunk was cracked down the middle. Through the crack, light poured out like gold. Jack blinked. Clara stared. "You see a broken tree?" Nora said. "But I see where the light gets in." Clara pressed her hand over her mouth. The image, the metaphor, the matter-of-fact way Nora had said it, it gutted her, not with pain, but with truth. A truth so deep and gentle it bypassed every defense Clara had so carefully constructed. "You're not 9, Clara whispered. "You're something older wearing a child's shoes." Nora giggled. "That's what my grandma says too." Jack chuckled. "And she's rarely wrong." The light above them flickered faintly as another announcement crackled over the speaker system, another delayed flight. No one at their table flinched. In fact, Clara found herself silently grateful. "I don't want to be someone people pity anymore," she said. "I used to be fire. Now I feel like ash." Jack's expression shifted just barely, but enough for Clara to notice. He looked down at his calloused hands, took a breath, then spoke. "I used to run into burning buildings." Clara blinked. "You firefighter," he said. 10 years, Ladder 4, Austin. There was a rhythm to it. Gear up, scan the smoke. Trust your gut. But I never thought the worst day of my life would be the one where I couldn't save her. Her. The weight in that word was palpable. "Elena?" Clara asked. Jack nodded. His voice was quiet now, but not weak, like someone telling a story that still burned at the edges. "She was delivering supplies in the pediatric wing when the fire started. There was a ceiling collapse. I was outside. I heard her call over the radio." His hands curled slightly, fists half-formed on the table. "I got in," he continued, "but not fast enough." Clara didn't interrupt, didn't reach across the table. She just listened fully. And somehow, that was more comforting than any touch could have been. "There's this thing people say," Jack murmured. "She died doing what she loved." And yeah, maybe that's true. But no one talks about what it does to the person who survives doing what they loved, and couldn't save the one person who mattered most. Clara inhaled shakily. "You carried her voice out of that fire, and left your own behind." Jack looked at her startled, not because she was wrong, but because she was too right. "I know that silence," Clara said. "Not the kind that comes from absence, the kind that comes from guilt." They locked eyes. Two survivors, two stories scorched by different flames. "I used to believe," Clara whispered, "that if I just kept producing articles, interviews, sound bites, I could outrun what was unraveling inside me. But truth doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It just gets louder in the dark." Jack leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "I think I forgot who I was," Clara said. "No," Jack replied. "I think you just paused." She blinked at him. That word again, it kept returning like a lifeline. Nora tugged gently at Clara's sleeve. "Do you want to know what I think brave looks like?" Clara turned. "Yes, please." Nora stepped beside Clara's wheelchair and whispered, "It looks like someone who tells the truth about being scared and stays anyway." Clara's throat tightened. "And what does courage look like?" Nora beamed. "Exactly like this moment." Jack's eyes glistened. He reached for his daughter's hand, giving it a squeeze that spoke volumes. Clara laughed under her breath, wiping at the corner of her eye. "Your daughter's rewriting my vocabulary." Jack smiled. "She does that. She rewrote mine first." The three of them sat in a kind of peace few people find in airports, one not bought with tickets or upgrades, but earned through presence. Outside, the rain softened into mist. The runway lights blurred through the glass like distant stars. Clara looked down at her notebook again. "I think I want to write something new," she said. Jack tilted his head. "Now, no," Clara replied, "but soon. And when I do, I think it's going to start with fire and end with light." Nora leaned her head against Clara's arm. "That sounds like a story the world needs." Clara looked down at her. and you little spark might just be the reason it gets told. In that moment, Clara didn't feel like a woman stuck in a wheelchair. She felt like a storyteller again, and that was the beginning of her return. "Clara," Nora said quietly, swinging her legs under the airport bench. "Can I ask you something kind of weird?" Clara looked up from her notebook. She'd been doodling, not words, not sentences, just shapes, circles, spirals, things without edges. Somehow, that felt safer than trying to write a full thought. "You already did," she replied, her tone soft teasing. Nora grinned. "Okay, then. Can I ask you another weird thing?" Clara glanced over at Jack, who raised his eyebrows and gave a barely perceptible nod as if to say, "Brace yourself. She's winding up for something." "Go ahead," Clara said. Nora scooted closer, her voice suddenly more serious. "Will you teach me how to be brave?" Clara blinked. Jack, who had just taken a sip of his vending machine coffee, froze mid-sip. "Brave," Clara echoed. "Why would you need me to teach you that?" "You're already the bravest person I've met all day." Nora shook her head. "No, I just say brave things. That's easy. But sometimes I get scared to feel them." Clara leaned forward slowly in her chair, her fingers wrapping tighter around her notebook. "What do you mean?" Nora hesitated. "Like when I miss my mom. Sometimes I want to talk about it, but I feel like if I do, Dad might feel worse. So I don't. I pretend I'm okay." Jack looked over, his eyes suddenly still. Clara's voice dropped to a hush. "You're afraid if you speak the truth it'll hurt someone you love." Nora nodded. "Yeah, and I don't want to be a burden." Jack opened his mouth, but no words came out. Clara turned her chair slightly, angling toward the little girl who had somehow cracked her open over the last few hours. "Nora, can I tell you a secret?" The girl nodded. "I used to think being brave meant never crying in front of people, never showing weakness. I thought if I looked strong enough, people would trust me, believe me, leave me alone when I needed space." Nora's brow furrowed. "Did it work? For a while," Clara said, "until the day I needed help and realized I'd trained the whole world not to offer any." Jack looked down at the floor. His hand was still holding the empty paper cup, now crumpled slightly. "So what happened?" Nora asked. Clara smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "I started breaking quietly. So quietly even I didn't notice until I couldn't move. Until one day, I was sitting at a press conference and realized I hadn't felt anything in months. Not joy, not anger, not grief, just static." Nora scooted closer. "So what did you do?" Clara leaned forward. "I stopped pretending. And it hurt, like letting the air hit a wound you've been covering for too long." Jack finally spoke, his voice lower than usual. "And did the world crumble when you said it out loud?" "No," Clara replied. "It didn't. But my version of it did. The version where I had to be unbreakable, where no one was allowed to see me weak. That part fell apart." She paused. "And, strangely, that's when I started healing." Nora looked at her dad now. "Did you ever pretend for me?" Daddy Jack's face stiffened, not from fear, but from the weight of truth finally landing. "Every day," he said. "But I never meant to make you feel like you couldn't tell me things. I just thought I was supposed to be the strong one, but I don't want you to be the strong one," Nora whispered. "I want you to be real." That hit harder than Clara expected, even from the side. Jack swallowed once. Then, "I'll try." Clara glanced between them, and something deep inside her shifted again. This child, this father. They weren't here to fix her. They were here to mirror her, and she was finally starting to like what she saw. A nearby departure board flickered. Another flight delay. Another round of passengers groaning. But the three of them were somewhere else entirely, off the grid of normal timelines, floating in a shared stillness that felt strangely holy. Clara looked at Nora again. "You asked me to teach you how to be brave." Nora nodded. "Then here's lesson 1, Clara said, voice low but sure. "Bravery isn't a roar. It's a whisper that says, 'I'll try again tomorrow,' even when everything in you wants to disappear." Nora stared at her, then slowly reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out another crumpled boarding pass. She flattened it on the table and began to draw again. "What are you making now?" Clara asked. Nora didn't look up. "You'll see." Jack leaned toward Clara. "You just gave her more fuel. She's going to burn through all our boarding passes." "Worth it," Clara said. Then quieter, "That girl's going to change the world." Jack looked at her, something new behind his eyes. "She already changed mine." They sat in silence for a moment, watching Nora draw, watching the world go by in streaks and echoes around them. None of it mattered. Not the flights, not the schedules, not the delays, only this. Then Nora turned the drawing around. It was Clara again, but this time she wasn't in the chair. She was standing, arms stretched wide, sunlight breaking behind her like wings. Jack and Nora stood on either side holding her hands. Above them, in childlike script, was written, "You taught me how to be brave. Now it's your turn." Clara's breath caught, her throat tightened, her hands trembled, but this time, it wasn't weakness, it was release. She looked at Jack, then at Nora, and whispered, "I'm trying." Nora reached out, took her hand, and smiled. "Good, that's the bravest thing you've done all day." And for the first time since the accident, Clara believed it. The coffee in Clara's paper cup had long since gone cold, but she held it anyway, both hands wrapped around it like an anchor. Her fingers trembled slightly more from memory than from the tremor itself. Nora had fallen asleep in her father's lap, curled like a comma against Jack's side, her head nestled in the crook of his arm, one crayon still clutched in her hand, trailing a faint line of blue down her jeans. Jack sat still, barely breathing, like if he moved the spell would break. Clara didn't dare disturb it either. She just watched. A little girl asleep beside her father, a scene so ordinary. And yet it felt like something sacred. She let her eyes drift to the window. The rain had stopped, but the tarmac still glistened like glass. Runway lights blinked in the distance, casting long shadows across the marble floor. The lounge had emptied out a bit. The business crowd had thinned. New passengers replaced old ones, but their corner felt untouched by time. Until her phone buzzed. A vibration, soft but sharp like a ripple slicing through still water. Clara didn't need to look. She knew. Only one person had that particular tone. Dad. Priority line. Jack looked up immediately, sensing the shift in her posture. "You okay?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on the phone. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Then silence. She let it sit on the table like a loaded weapon. "That's him?" Jack asked quietly. Clara nodded. Yes. Jack didn't need to ask who. Her father had been lurking at the edges of every sentence she hadn't finished today. Clara's voice was low, more bitter than she meant it to be. "He probably thinks I'm already on the plane, doing what I'm supposed to, meeting the press, smiling on cue." Jack's jaw tightened. "Do you want to be there?" She laughed, but there was no joy in it. Wanting was never part of the arrangement. The phone buzzed again, then stopped. This time a text appeared on the screen flight boards in 12 minutes. "Media is briefed. We expect professionalism. Don't embarrass us." Jack read it over her shoulder. She didn't try to hide it. "You know, he said most people call that emotional blackmail." Clara's eyes stayed on the screen. "Most people don't have last names that double as corporate brands." Jack leaned forward. "Clara." She looked at him. "Your legs might be limited," he said, "but your life isn't. You get to choose where you go. No one else gets that vote." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. "Do you know what's worse than losing control of your body?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Losing control of your narrative." "My father doesn't see me. He sees a headline, a tool for legacy preservation." Jack's voice was steady. "You're not a symbol, you're a story, and you get to finish it." The phone buzzed again. Clara picked it up this time. Her thumb hovered over the answer button, but instead of pressing it, she pressed mute. Then she set the phone down face down and exhaled. "I think," she said slowly, "that was the first decision I've made in over a year that wasn't out of fear." Jack smiled gently. "You'll want to remember that feeling. It gets addictive." There was a pause. a long golden silence that neither of them rushed to break. Then Clara whispered, "He won't call back. Not after that." Jack studied her. "How do you feel about that?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Free." And then, almost to herself, terrified, but free. Nora stirred softly in her sleep, her hand brushing against Clara's arm. Clara looked down at her. "You know, she said, I've spent the last year surrounded by people who cared about my recovery, but not my reality. They wanted me to walk again so they could pretend nothing had changed." Jack nodded slowly. "Recovery is just a fancy word people use when they want the past back." Clara's gaze locked with his. "But what if we're not supposed to go back?" Then Jack said gently, "Maybe you're not recovering. Maybe you're becoming." That line hung in the air like gospel. Clara leaned back in her chair. Her hands no longer trembled, not because the tremor had stopped, but because she stopped hiding it. "I used to carry the weight of being the voice of the people," she said. "Now I just want to be heard by one person who actually sees me." "You're not invisible here," Jack said. "You never were." She looked at him, really looked, past the weathered lines, past the quiet sadness into something steady and kind and safe for the first time in a very long time. She didn't feel alone in the room. Just then, a staff member in uniform approached their corner of the lounge, clipboard in hand. "Miss Whitmore," he asked, glancing at the sleeping child, then at Jack. "Your jet is ready for boarding." Clara froze. She looked at the staffer, then back at Jack, then down at Nora, whose head had settled gently on her lap. A few hours ago, she would have said yes. Now, she looked at the man and said calmly, "Not yet. I need a few more minutes." The staffer blinked. "Ma'am, they're ready for takeoff." She smiled, not fake, not political, just calm. Let them wait. And with that, she turned her chair back toward Jack. Jack raised his eyebrows. "You sure about that?" Clara nodded. "I just declined my first command in months. I think that deserves a second coffee." Jack stood. "It'll be terrible." "I hope so," she said. "I want to remember what earned tastes like." Jack gave a quiet laugh, then turned toward the vending area. Clara watched him go, then looked down at Nora, sleeping beside her, and whispered, "Thank you, little one, for seeing me before I remembered how." Jack returned with 2 steaming paper cups that smelled vaguely of burnt hope. Clara took one with a grateful nod. "This," she said, blowing on the rim, "smells like it was brewed in a place where ambition goes to die." Jack chuckled. "It builds character." Clara sipped, winced. "Or dissolves your taste buds." They both laughed, a quiet shared release. Across from them, Nora was now awake again, stretching like a cat and blinking toward the window. Her sketchpad lay open beside her, a fresh page waiting. But Clara wasn't looking at the view anymore. She reached slowly into the leather tote bag that had sat by her side all morning untouched until now, and pulled out a folder. Thick, branded, embossed with a gold W on the corner. Jack noticed the shift in her demeanor immediately. "What's that?" he asked. "My future," she said. "At least the one that was built for me." She set the folder on the table. It landed with a soft thud that felt heavier than it should have. Jack didn't say anything, but Clara could feel his eyes on her as she opened it. Inside, press release drafts, sponsorship contracts, staged, speaking engagement notes, even a mock interview Q&A with questions pre-approved by PR staff. Clara flipped through the pages like she was rifling through someone else's life. "This is who I'm supposed to be now," she said. "The rebranded version. The narrative my father crafted, courageous Clara Whitmore, survivor, CEO in the making face of the new philanthropic arm of Whitmore Communications." She turned another page. "They even drafted an op-ed I'm supposed to sign and submit under my name. I didn't write a word of it." Jack frowned. "That's not a future, that's a script." Clara didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the glossy language, the curated bullet points. "I used to write about people who lost their voices in systems too loud to hear them," she said, "and now I'm one of them." Nora leaned in from across the table. "So, stop reading it." Clara finally looked up. "What?" "Just Close the book, Nora said. You already know how it ends, right? So, write a different one. Jack gave a soft exhale, half laugh, half something heavier. She does this, he said to Clara. Gets to the heart of things without warning. Clara reached for a pen from her bag. Her fingers hovered over the documents. Then she flipped to the first page, the master itinerary, and with one deliberate stroke she drew a single line down the center. Not a scribble, not a tantrum, a choice. She turned to the next page, and the next. Each one received the same treatment, line after line, silencing someone else's story so she could find her own again. Jack watched in silence, his jaw tight with emotion he didn't voice. When Clara reached the last page, she paused, then slowly closed the folder and let out a long, trembling breath. Nora clapped softly, just once. That was better than any movie I've seen. Clara laughed, a sound that came from deeper in her chest now. I think she said I needed to see myself do it, not just talk about it. Jack nodded. That's the only way you'll believe it's real. Clara looked over at him, her voice quieter now. You know what scares me most? He shook his head gently. It's not that I won't be able to walk again. It's that I might walk, but still end up going back to a life that never felt like mine. Jack leaned in, his voice low. Then don't walk back, walk forward. Even if it's slow, even if it's messy. Clara's eyes misted again, but she didn't look away. I keep thinking there's supposed to be this grand moment, some cinematic turning point, but maybe it's just this. Jack offered a small smile. Most of the important moments don't come with applause. Just coffee. And the right people sitting across from you. Clara reached over and slid the folder to the edge of the table. I don't know what comes next, she said, but I know it doesn't come from these pages. Nora stood and carefully tore a corner off the front of the folder. She handed it to Clara like a piece of sacred paper. Write something real on it, she said, even if it's just your name. Clara stared at the girl, heart tightening in the best way. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She took her pen. On the torn paper she wrote, Clara Whitmore. Unedited. And suddenly her hands weren't shaking anymore. The vending machine hummed in the background. Another flight was called over the speakers. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried. But in their little corner of the terminal, something permanent had shifted. Clara wasn't just waiting to board a plane. She was ready to depart from an entire version of herself that no longer served her. And this time she had no interest in checking the itinerary. The corridor leading to the vending machines felt like another world. The velvet and chrome of the VIP lounge gave way to dull tile fluorescent lights and the quiet hum of old machinery. Here the air smelled faintly of plastic and floor wax. There was no concierge, no polished piano soundtrack, just the hollow clink of coins dropping into stubborn metal slots. And for Clara Whitmore, it was perfect. She rolled her chair slowly, the soft whir of the wheels accompanying each determined push. Jack walked beside her, a half step behind, not guiding, not touching, just with. Nora skipped slightly ahead, humming a tune only she knew, her little backpack bouncing with every step. Halfway down the hall, Clara paused to catch her breath. Her arms were trembling again, the tremor now aggravated by effort. Sweat pooled at her temples. Her fingers clenched the wheels tighter. You want help? Jack asked softly, crouching to her level without moving closer. Clara didn't look at him. She stared at the tile beneath her wheels and exhaled through her nose. No, she said. I want to finish this. Jack nodded once and stood back up. Nora turned to look, her expression concerned. I'm okay, Clara said, meeting the girl's eyes. I promise. With another deep breath she pushed forward, inch by inch. It wasn't far, maybe 40 feet in total, but it felt like a mile, not because her body couldn't handle it, but because this was the first time in months she wasn't letting someone else handle it for her, and that made it everything. When they reached the machine, Clara leaned back and laughed breathlessly. This is worse than I imagined. Jack tapped the blinking green button. Told you, builds character. Clara smirked. That line belongs on a t-shirt. Jack fished for coins while Nora read the faded drink labels aloud. hot chocolate, espresso, caramel latte, bold roast. What's that? Jack chuckled. Code for don't. They settled on 2 basic coffees. The machine grunted and sputtered and finally dribbled hot liquid into paper cups with all the elegance of a coughing rhinoceros. Jack handed one to Clara with both hands, careful not to spill. She took it, wrapping her fingers around the warmth like it was a lifeline. You know, she said I haven't moved myself across a room since the hospital rehab wing. That was 5 months ago. Jack looked at her, and today Clara met his gaze. Today I chose where I went. Jack raised his cup slightly in a mock toast. 2 terrible coffee and better choices. Clara clinked hers against his. Cheers. They sat on a bench beside the vending machine, the hum of the old compressor filling the silence between sips. Clara closed her eyes for a moment and listened to the whir of the air vent above the sound of Nora's pencil-scratching paper, the faint voices echoing down the hall. Then she whispered, I forgot what it feels like to decide. Jack leaned back against the wall. It's not just about walking, is it? She shook her head. No, the chair isn't the prison. The schedule was. The smile on command. The perfect clothes, perfect answers, perfect angles. My father used to tell me perception is currency. I spent my whole life earning nothing but approval. Jack's voice was low. You're not a brand. No, she said, I'm a person. And I think I finally remembered that today. Nora looked up. You're more than a person. You're you. Clara smiled. What does that mean exactly? Nora pointed to her newest drawing, then flipped it around. This one showed a woman in a wheelchair surrounded by gold lines. But instead of sitting still, she was moving, through a rainstorm, with Jack and Nora beside her holding umbrellas. Underneath, Nora had written, You don't need to walk to move forward. Clara stared at the drawing like it had been carved into her chest. You're 9, she said, her voice breaking, and you're already writing better truth than most adults ever dare to speak. Nora shrugged. I just listen harder. Jack looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and awe. Clara took another sip of her coffee and winced. This is objectively the worst beverage I've ever had, and somehow, I think I'll remember it forever, because you earned it, Jack said simply. They fell quiet again. Then Clara spoke slowly, carefully. Jack. Can I ask you something personal? He looked over, surprised. Of course. What happened to you? After the fire. His shoulders rose, then dropped in a long breath. I stopped speaking for a while, not out loud, but inside. I didn't tell people how guilty I felt, how I couldn't sleep, how I'd walk past families at the grocery store and wonder if I deserved mine. Clara nodded slowly. Did you ever forgive yourself? Jack stared at the floor. I don't know if I have, Ed. That word she said yet. It's small, but it holds hope. Jack looked up at her. So does yours. What you said you forgot how to decide, he said. But you just did. You came here. You pushed yourself. You said no when the world expected yes. That's not forgetting. That's remembering. Clara looked at him, and for the first time since she'd lost control of her legs, she didn't feel like something broken waiting to be fixed. She felt like a woman returning to herself. You really believe people can come back from anything, she asked. Jack answered without pause. Only if they stop trying to come back as who they were and start becoming who they were always meant to be. Clara blinked hard. That might be the most dangerous kind of hope, and the most necessary, Jack said, especially for people like us. They sat a while longer, sipping their terrible coffee like it was sacred, because maybe it was, not for the taste, but for what it symbolized: freedom, choice, a second chance served in a paper cup. The hallway back to the lounge felt different now. Clara moved slower, not because she was tired, though she was, but because for the first time in months, she wanted to feel every inch of the journey. Each push of the wheels, each breath between effort and movement, was no longer just about mobility. It was about ownership. Jack walked quietly beside her coffee cup in one hand, the crumpled flight folder in the other. Nora skipped ahead, humming again, her sketch pad tucked under one arm like a sacred artifact. When they returned to the lounge, the staff member was still waiting. "Miss Whitmore," he said politely, "your private jet has been cleared for immediate takeoff. The crew is ready. Shall I escort you to the gate?" Clara didn't answer right away. She looked past him toward the wide glass windows where the jet sat gleaming on the tarmac. The stairway was lowered, the door open, everything pristine, waiting for her like a promise or a trap. Jack stood a few feet back, unreadable. Nora looked between the two of them, then slowly walked to Clara's side and pressed something gently into her lap. It was another drawing. Clara unfolded it. This one was simple, no golden lines, no symbols. Just 3 people standing in the rain. Jack, Nora, and her. But in the picture, Clara wasn't in a wheelchair. She was standing, laughing, holding both their hands, and above them in Nora's bold handwriting, "You don't have to fly away to feel free." Clara's breath caught. She stared at the drawing like it had cracked open something inside her, something raw and unnamed. "I don't—" she began, then stopped. The staffer took a step forward. "Miss Whitmore." Jack said nothing. He didn't coax, didn't advise. He just stood there, his expression open, steady, waiting for her to choose. Clara looked down at the drawing again, and then, slowly, quietly, almost reverently, she folded the paper and placed it in her bag. She turned to the staffer and said, "Tell the crew I won't be boarding." The man blinked. "Ma'am, I won't be boarding," she repeated, her voice steady. "Please thank the pilot, and cancel the rest of the itinerary. Effective immediately." He opened his mouth, closed it, nodded, and walked away. Clara sat there for a long moment, the silence between them electric. Then she looked at Jack. "I've never said no to a jet before." Jack smiled. "Felt good, terrifying," she whispered. "And yes." Nora clapped once. "Best plot twist ever." Clara laughed, a real full laugh. It echoed slightly off the high ceilings and drew a glance or two from the nearby passengers. She didn't care. She'd been the quiet, composed statue in the corner long enough. Jack sat down beside her again. What now? Clara looked at him. Her eyes were clear, shining. "I don't know," she said. "That's the best part." Nora climbed onto the seat beside her, resting her head on Clara's shoulder without asking. "I think," Clara said softly, "I want to find out what kind of life exists when I'm not being curated." Jack nodded. "You don't need to be curated. You just need to be lived." Clara glanced down at Nora. "You really believe that drawing of me standing?" Nora tilted her head. "I didn't draw what's real. I drew what's true." Clara's breath hitched again. "And what's the difference?" Nora looked up. "Real is what everyone sees. True is what we believe even when no one else does." Jack closed his eyes for a beat. That one. That one hit deep. Across the lounge, another overhead announcement blared. Passengers gathered. Planes lifted. The world continued to spin. But in their corner time had done something unusual. It had paused. Clara looked out the window again. The jet was still sitting there. The door open. Engines humming. But it no longer looked like freedom. It looked like departure. And what she had now felt like arrival. She turned to Jack. "I'm not going to ask what comes next," she said. "I think for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with not knowing." Jack raised his coffee cup again. "Here's to not knowing." Clara raised hers in return, and still choosing anyway. They sipped in quiet rhythm. Then Nora sat up suddenly. "Wait, if she's not flying away, where does she go now?" Clara turned to her. "Where do you think I should go?" Nora grinned. "Somewhere with music, and messy kitchens, and people who don't care if you cry during breakfast." Jack looked at Clara. "We have that. It's not fancy, but it's real." Clara smiled. "That sounds impossible and perfect." Nora reached into her sketch pad and began another drawing without a word. Jack leaned closer. You don't have to answer now. Clara shook her head. No, I do. I'm just giving the answer the space it deserves. Another long pause. Then Clara looked at both of them. Would it be crazy, she asked, if I didn't go back to anything that waited for me before Jack didn't blink? Sometimes the bravest thing isn't walking away. It's not returning. Clara let the words sink in. Then she said it. I want to stay. Jack exhaled slowly. Then stay. Clara looked back out at the tarmac, then down at Nora's newest drawing. This one wasn't under rain, it was sunlight. And, for the first time, she didn't feel like a woman stuck between destinations. She felt like a story just beginning. The private jet door finally closed. No announcement, no fanfare, no last boarding call, just a gentle hiss of hydraulics as the stairway lifted and the jet, Clara Whitmore's jet, prepared to take off without her. Clara sat by the tall lounge window and watched it roll away from the gate, slowly taxiing into the distance until it became just another shape against the gray tarmac. Then it disappeared altogether, swallowed by clouds and sky. She didn't flinch, didn't second-guess, didn't look at her phone. Her hands rested in her lap, one thumb brushing slowly over the corner of Nora's folded drawing like it was a keepsake from the future. I've missed so many things in my life, Clara whispered. Moments, meals, mornings, all because I thought the only direction was forward, fast, successful, loud. Jack leaned his elbow on the table beside her, and now she looked at him. Now I realize. Sometimes the bravest direction is inward. Jack nodded slowly. Stillness can be a form of motion. Nora, sitting cross-legged on the bench across from them, perked up. That's going in my quote journal. Clara smiled. Do I get a royalty every time you use one of my lines? No, Nora grinned. But you get a page. Clara laughed, the sound softer now round her, like it no longer had to push through walls to be heard. Jack studied her for a moment, then said gently, You're different. Clara tilted her head. Since when? Since this morning. When I first saw you. You looked like marble. Solid. Sharp. Cold. Unreachable. Like a statue built by someone else's idea of who you were supposed to be. She blinked, and now Jack smiled. Now you look like someone learning how to breathe again. The words sat between them like something sacred. Clara looked away for a moment out of the window again. The sky had cleared slightly. Faint rays of sunlight cut through the cloud layer, casting long streaks of gold across the wet tarmac. She turned back to Jack. Do you really think it's possible to start over? I don't think it's just possible, he said. I think it's necessary. Even for people like us. Especially for people like us. She looked down at her lap. Her fingers trembled again, but this time she didn't hide them. Nora gently slid a new piece of paper toward her. Then let's draw a new beginning. Clara hesitated, then reached into her bag, pulled out her notebook, and laid it beside the page. She opened to a clean sheet. Her handwriting, once polished and pristine, now appeared raw, wobbly, and imperfect. But every letter was hers. She wrote, This is the day I didn't leave. Nora leaned over and whispered, That's your title. Clara looked at her. Title of what? Whatever comes next. Jack took a long breath, then said, You don't have to figure it all out now. Sometimes all you need is the next step. Clara closed her notebook and said softly, Then I'd like the next step. To be somewhere that doesn't expect me to perform. Jack met her gaze. My place has a crooked porch, a dog that thinks he's smarter than he is, and a kitchen with one working burner. No cameras, no press, no curated smiles. Clara smiled. Sounds like exactly the chaos I need. Nora raised her hand. Also, our pancakes are weirdly shaped but taste amazing. Clara turned toward her. That seals the deal. Jack looked slightly cautious now. You sure this isn't a getaway? It's real. Messy, sometimes quiet, sometimes too loud. Clara held his gaze. I'm not looking for polished. I'm looking for honest. He nodded. Then let's get you out of this terminal. She glanced down. And what do I do with the rest of this? She asked, gesturing to the branded folder still resting at the end of the bench. Jack picked it up, flipped through the remaining pages, and handed her the final sheet. Blank. Untouched. "Start with this," he said. She took the page, folded it slowly, and tucked it into her notebook. "I spent so long letting other people write my story," she said. "It feels strange and holy to hold the pen again." Jack reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, battered key. "We don't have a guest room, but we've got a fold-out couch and a blanket Nora says is lucky." Clara accepted the key. It felt heavy and right in her palm. "I don't know where this is going," she said. "You don't have to," Jack replied. "Just go with people who see you as you are not who they expect you to be." Nora stood stretching. "Can we go now? I want to show Clara the birdhouse we made from soup cans." Jack grinned. "Sure." Clara wheeled forward. Jack moved beside her, not touching the chair, just walking at her pace. Nora skipped ahead, humming again. As they approached the sliding glass doors of the terminal, Clara glanced over her shoulder once at the spot where she'd spent the day, where she'd said no to a jet and yes to herself. Then she whispered just to herself, "Goodbye, version of me that settled." The doors slid open. The world was waiting, and this time Clara Whitmore wasn't departing. She was arriving into her own life. The porch creaked under Clara's wheels as she rolled into the golden morning light. The air smelled like cinnamon toast, fresh-cut grass, and the faint scent of paint from Nora's newest project drying on the railing, 2 soup cans turned into flower pots overflowing with daisies. Jack stepped out behind her, 2 mismatched mugs in his hands. "You know," he said, handing her the blue one with a chipped rim, "when I pictured mornings like this, I never thought they'd feel like home." Clara wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic. "Neither did I," she whispered. A silence settled over them, not empty, but full, of acceptance, of peace, of all the noise they'd finally laid down. Inside, Nora's voice echoed faintly, singing off-key while brushing Biscuit the dog's fur. She was rewriting the words to a song she'd heard at school, something about stars and staying. Clara looked out over the yard. "I used to think bravery meant standing on stages, leading rooms, outlasting the storm." Jack lowered himself beside her. "And now," she said, "I think bravery is quieter. It's choosing to stay, to feel, to love, even when it's easier not to." Jack watched her, his eyes tracing every line in her face like a map he'd grown to love. "You know what I admire most about you?" Clara arched a brow. "My charm," he chuckled. "That you showed up, broken maybe. But you showed up, not for some headline, not for some battle, for a little girl with a sketchbook and a janitor with too many past lives." Clara looked down, her eyes glistening. "I came here thinking I had nothing left, and somehow I found everything." Jack reached into his pocket, pulled out something small and delicate, a pendant. It was old weathered silver with a tiny compass etched into it. North, south, east, west, but the letters were worn thin from years of touch. "This belonged to my wife," he said. "Nora's mom. She gave it to me the day I got accepted into the fire academy. Told me, no matter how lost you feel, this will remind you that you're never alone." Clara took a breath, moved her hand over the pendant reverently. "I want you to have it," Jack said. Her head snapped up. "Jack, I can't." "You can," he interrupted softly, "because you helped me believe again, in hope, in healing, in tomorrow." Tears slid quietly down her cheeks. "You helped Nora believe she was safe enough to speak," he added. "That alone, I'd give you the moon for that." Clara reached out and touched his hand. "Then let me give something back." She wheeled forward a few feet, then turned to face him fully. "I've decided not to sell the foundation, or rebrand it, or disappear." Jack looked confused. "I'm going to rebuild it," she said, "but not with corporate donors or Galenites. I want it to be real, local, human. I want Nora to be its first junior artist in residence. And you," she smiled, eyes shining, "you can be our head of maintenance / chief pancake officer." Jack smirked. "Do I get dental?" "No," she grinned. But Nora said you make the best blueberry pancakes on this side of the county. He looked at her long and quiet. You're staying. I'm not just staying, she said. I'm choosing. He reached for her hand. Then I'm choosing too. A beat passed. Then from inside the house Nora's voice rang out. Dad! Clara, you're missing the grand unveiling of the Bird Hotel. They both laughed. Better not keep the artist waiting, Jack said, rising to his feet. Clara followed him down the ramp toward the backyard, her heart full, not of adrenaline or applause, but of something richer, quieter, deeper. When they reached the tree, Nora stood proudly beneath a low branch revealing a birdhouse painted in wild strokes of blue and orange. The word brave was scrawled in bright yellow above the door. It's for the birds who don't know where home is yet, she said simply. Clara crouched beside her. That might be the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Nora smiled, then leaned in and whispered, Clara, are you happy? Clara paused, and then with a tear slipping past her lashes, she nodded, yes, for the first time. I didn't run from the quiet, and it loved me back. Nora didn't reply. She just hugged her. Jack stepped beside them, sliding an arm around both, and for a moment beneath a sky that held no promises but offered its presence anyway, they stood still. A former firefighter who once thought his best days were buried under ash. A little girl who dared to speak light into silence, and a woman who remembered how to feel the sun again. Because sometimes the bravest thing isn't to fight the world. It's to stay where healing can finally find you. Sometimes the smallest voice asks the bravest question, and in that moment lives are changed forever. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, we read every one of them. And if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the quiet power of kindness, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story that might just change your day. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending your time with us. Your presence here means more than you know. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and keep believing in the goodness of people. See you in the next story.